Hello everybody, welcome to Knit56. This is my second episode. It's July 20th and it's extremely warm. I've had to turn the air conditioning off because it was making too much noise. This is the second time I'm running through this today, but I'm happy to share what I'm doing. My name is Shawn and welcome. I'm so glad you decided to come and spend some time with me this afternoon. I am going to show you some works in progress, some finished items, and then I'm going to read some history to you. So this is the book, A History of Hand Knitting. So we'll start off with some works in progress, and we'll have some fun. Last week I talked a little bit about my winter whites jacket. It's a jacket that I'm crocheting circles for and then sewing together to create a jacket. And I showed you the back and a front and a side that had been seamed together. And this week I thought I'd show you the sleeves. So here we go. There are lots of little circles crocheted and knit together. And the sleeves are in two parts. There's an upper sleeve and a lower sleeve. So there's lots of nice shaping. And this is really fun. Each little circle has one, two, or three different colors of white or ecru or off-white. And it's just really fun. So from far away, they kind of look like honeycombs. This is my sleeves, and they're almost done. I still have to define the edges so they're nice and smooth and then sew them together, the upper part of the sleeve and the lower part of the sleeve, and then those get set in to the jacket. I haven't worked on this week. Oh, it's a big project. So this project is part of my Shackleton Cal, which is going on over at Fiber Trek with Sarah. So if you're interested in that, check her out. And I watch her podcast. I love her podcast. She's located in Upper Maine, and it's so beautiful there, and I'll bet it's a lot cooler than it is here. Now for another works in progress that I included last week, but when I was editing, I cut it out. So it's in the episode notes for last week, but there's nothing showing for this project. This is Gary's sweater. I'm knitting it out of Harrisville worsted weight in the charcoal color, and I love this. It's going to be a little awkward to show you because I'm working on both the sleeves at once with the magic loop. So this is the sleeves, but I can show you, and I have them leaning towards the front. Here's the back of the sweater. And so you can see it's a knit purl pattern for the yoke. And then just about a couple inches under the sleeves, under the armholes, I go into another stitch pattern, which I really like. And I'll show you more about that. But anyway, luckily, this has got some shaping and it looks a little weird, not on a body, but I took his measurements and I'm making it to fit him. It will be his special sweater. And luckily he doesn't need it till the fall because it's too hot to have this in my lap right now. So now you've seen the sweater, and there will be show notes on my podcast page, Knit56 in Ravelry. Now I'm going to show you a shawl that I was working on last week. And I've gotten from that yellow string up to the top. That's how much I've gotten done this week. This is called, what is that? What did I name it? Factura 4. Factura 4, because there's 3 stitch patterns and they're each a factor of 4. It's a triangular shaped shawl. And here is the top and the center. It increases on the centers and the edges. And that's the same stitch that's on Gary's yoke. Knit and purl stitches. there's the pattern that's on the body of Gary's sweater. This is a merino yarn, kind of a fingering weight, and it's very round and it's soft. It's merino, and you can't really see the third pattern. It's not quite developed yet because I just started it. Hopefully next week you'll be able to see that. So this is my Factura 4. If anyone wants to knit this is the third one I've done. I did one in a lace weights with 2 colors, and I did one in a silk wool blend that was kind of a DK weight. And now I'm using this. Let's see, the DK weight one took, I can't remember how many yards. It's in the show notes. Once again, it's in the show notes. You can find them on my blog at acmeknits.com. But I would love to have some people knit this. I'd like to see it in a yarn gradation. It would be really cool too. So you can PM me, send me a personal message to LuluGal on Ravelry if you would be interested in knitting this on any weight, wool, and appropriate needles. That would be great. One more project in process on my needles. And this is for my Canada Cal, or I'm knitting it and I've joined the Canada Cal because this yarn is a roving. It's called Rovings, the company is, and it's from Canada, I think Alberta. And I'm doing an infinity scarf, and it's on the reverse stockinette background. And it's this little cable pattern that will be repeated, and it goes it's going to be along the short way, horizontal, instead of around the long way. And I love working on this. I just get to go around and around and around. This is a Pullworth silk. I think I have until September 1st to finish this for the Cal. I'll have to go back and look at the notes, look at the page again, but I love these little traveling one stitch cables. So cool. Okay. So that's all I'm going to show you for works in progress. I have some more, but we don't want to go on and on and on. I'm going to show you something I finished last year while I was in Germany visiting my sister. I had knit a shawl for my friend Carol out of Barocco Alpaca Light. It's an alpaca wool blend, and I had some left after knitting her shawl. So I decided to knit a freeform shawl. It's a cowl, like an infinity scarf, and it's really long, as you can see here. And it's all garter stitch, and this is one of my favorite ways to use up ends of yarn that I really like. This yarn is really nice and warm, it's soft, it's drapey. Even though it's 90 degrees, I'll put this on for you, just for you. It's beautiful, isn't it? But it's also very warm. So this is fun. It's a fun knit. You just do whatever you want. So I start by casting on a number of stitches, how wide I want the scarf to be, and just switch rows, knitting stripes for as long as you want. And then when this section, as big as you want it to be, you cast on a number of stitches for however long you want the next part to be. And you work back and forth. And when you get to this part, these are live stitches, you knit 2 together, or SSK. I think I SSK'd and then slipped when I turned to knit back. So then you're knitting back and forth, just putting in the colors wherever you want. It's garter stitch. And then you have to get over here and you cast this row off, bind off, and then pick up stitches across the top of the part you just knit, and you knit back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So you just continue to do that. And it's great because you could just make, you know, all these different parts using different colors. I think this is 7 different colors. And you can see, I mean, you know, this side might be a little bit neater, I'm not sure. But when I am joining new colors, I just knit the 2 yarns together. I don't try to weave it in, you know, so that you can't see it invisibly. This is my favorite swatch right here, this one. The long one actually goes like this when you have it on. So there's another idea for, see, look, and sometimes you can just do a lot of color. Sometimes you could do lots of short 2 rows sequences. It's really fun. It's a really fun way to use up leftover yarn. I don't think I would ever make what are those blankets called? A memories blanket? Because this is how I would rather use up my yarn. So there's another idea for using up ends of yarn. I have one more finished piece to show you before I start reading. And this is a piece of knitting that I did last year, but I created a pattern for it about 5 years ago. So this is my second one. And remember how I said knitting always teaches me something? Well, what I learned from this piece is that I'm not as clever as I think, which is always good to be reminded of. So I thought I had created a new stitch pattern, a new way of knitting. I was so thrilled. I wrote 3 patterns using this style of knitting. It's not really, it's kind of a stitch. I don't know what it is, but so anyway, here's the second one I've done. The first shawl that I wrote the pattern for is called Wrapped in Camel because I knitted out of camel yarn. This is wool from Blackberry Ridge, so and it's knit on the bias. This one's not as wide as the one that I have in my pattern, but you can do any number of stitches. So I have a couple of different colors of purple, and then this corner is dark purple. So once again, I had this yarn in my stash. I didn't know what I was going to do with it, so I decided to just blend it together, and each little section is 2 different colors of yarn. And this is fairly open. This is a lace weight yarn. I think I knit it on a 3 or maybe even a 4. So now, you might be asking, what's so special about this? It looks like garter stitch. Well, it's not garter stitch. It's a new stitch that's got these like ribbons. I think of them as ribbons, or they're kind of valleys. There's a high part, there's a part on top, and then there's a part that's lower or behind. And the way this is done, it's really fun. It's really fun. It makes a perfectly flat fabric also. So you use 2 colors and a circular needle with the appropriate size yarn, however open you want the fabric to be. And you cast on and you knit a row. And usually what you would do is you would turn that work around and knit back. But instead, don't turn your work. You slip all the stitches to the other end of the cable needle, and then you purl with the second color. So then you have 2 ends of yarn on one side of the needle. Then you turn your work around, and with the first color, color A, which you knit with before, you knit again. So you knit all the way across the stitches. Then you move the stitches back to the end of the cable needle, and you purl with color B. Then you purl across, and then you turn. So you're working 2 rows in one direction. I thought I was so clever. And it's this really nice pattern. I mean, it creates, so one is kind of forward and the other color is kind of in the back. And I wrote this Wrapped in Camel shawl. I wrote another shawl pattern called Anna Dorothy. That was my grandmother's name, Anna Dorothy. And that is using this stitch pattern for the top, and then there's an applied lace border, which is really fun. And then this isn't published yet, but I did some fingerless mitts where you knit them the long way, this way, doing short rows for increasing for the palm. And then there's a seam here, you seam that up, and then you knit the thumb circularly. This is just a 1-1 rib. So the pattern will have 2 different sizes, child's and adults. It's really fun. You could, another way you can use up leftover yarn. So I had never seen this anywhere. I didn't know what to call it. I didn't know if it had a name. It's just knit and purl, right? It's like stockinette, knit a row, purl a row, but 2 rows in the same direction. Then about 4 years after I had done this, I saw it in a magazine. I think it was a Knitter's magazine. I don't remember. It was a shawl done in the same way, 2 colors, and I thought I was so clever, and here someone else had thought of it or saw it as well. And I wrote the designer. I don't remember the designer or the name, but I wrote to her and asked her about it, and she said she had seen it somewhere else. So a little humbling experience learned from my knitting. It's all good. I'm back, ready to start doing some reading from The History of Hand Knitting. This was published, I think, in 1987, so it's been a while. There's a foreword by Meg Swanson from Schoolhouse Press, which I will read. This is the foreword by Meg Swanson. What a useful and welcome book this is. At present, we are happily awash in scores of books about knitting techniques and garment design, but relatively lacking in information about the origins of our craft. The knowledge herein offers the historical continuity necessary to provide a solid foundation for our ever-growing knitting community. Although described by the author as an, quote, incomplete and uneven amateur work, unquote, Richard Rutt provides us with information we need to obtain an appreciation for the origins of hand knitting and the dazzling achievements of our knitting predecessors. Not one to succumb to widespread and seductive historical knitting rumors, the author has sifted through an extensive collection of tomes and essays, as well as snips and hearsay, to draw sensible and logical conclusions about our misty and uncertain beginnings. Many of us go through different hand knitting periods and may fall under the temporary spell of a particular discipline, color patterns, errands, guernseys, stockings, lace, fair isle, etc. As you work your way through your current knitting passion, turn to this book and read about the commencement of that particular method, if not the actual genesis, at least as much of it as the author has been able to unearth. Isn't this exciting? There is a satisfaction to being able to muse and ruminate about the lives and eras of the countless knitters who have gone before, who, to quote Elizabeth Zimmerman, have held wool and needles since the beginning of sheep, unquote. How pleased I am that after an absence of several years, this book has been restored to us. Words for knitting. Just as there is no ancient Greek word for knitting, so there never has been an accurate Latin word for it, not even in medieval and Renaissance times. Even in the 16th century, when knitting was widespread in Western Europe, the saintly Cardinal Archbishop of Milan, Carlo Borromeo, in his Latin regulations on ecclesiastical dress, used contextus, or interwoven, to describe the fabric of bishops' gloves. He had no accurate Latin word for knitted, so he was driven to use a slightly unusual word meaning woven. An 18th century French scholar, Louis Poisonnet de Sivry, thought he had discovered a Latin word for knitting. Oh, exciting. In 1771-82, he published a 3-volume edition of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, which was completed shortly before Pliny died in AD 79. In chapter 73 of the 8th book of the Natural History, deals with wool, and describes sheep whose fleece is more like hair than wool. Such sheep were found, Pliny said, in Croatia, Narbonne, Egypt, and Portugal, where their fleece was used for making scutellatum textum. Later in the chapter, he said that Palamida, a cloth woven of many threads, probably damask, was first made in Alexandria, but cloth decorated with scutula was first made in Gaul. Poisonet de Sivry noticed that elsewhere Pliny speaks of a spider's web as scutulatum. Okay, this is spelled Scutulatum. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it right. So Pliny speaks of spider's web as scutulatum, quite illogically deduced that the word meant knitted, gave himself credit for discovering the Latin word for knitting, and demanded that Latin dictionaries should be revised accordingly. Well, the dictionaries were never revised. Poisonet de Sivry was wrong. Scutulum means a little shield or plate, usually square, perhaps lozenge-shaped. A pattern of little squares or patches, or a checkered pattern, was described as scutulatum. Pliny used the same word to describe an ornamental pavement. Other writers use it to describe the color of certain horses, as well as of clothes. When applied to a spider's web, it refers to the quadrangular spaces between the threads of the web. Pliny's reference to Gaul probably indicates a primitive Celtic check or tartan. There is no justification for Poisonet de Sivry's guess that Pliny knew about knitting. Darn. It's odd to think that there wasn't a word for knit. So weird. Anyway, not until the Renaissance do we find words that mean to knit. At first they were confused. Words related to mesh, net, or knot were tried. At the same time, words related to the commonest knitted objects, caps and stockings, were used. French in the early 16th century used lacet, lacing, and bonneterie, cap making. The modern French word tricot is not known before 1660. It is probably the same root as the German stricke, from a word meaning rod or stick. The Italian maglia, mesh, and Spanish punta de media, stocking point, are not known to be older. Scandinavian words have similar short histories. In Norway, the modern word is strikke, as in Denmark, stick in Sweden, from the German, but before the middle 19th century, Norwegians used bind, or binding. Russian was viazats, to interlace or to twine, and lacks a precise word. The common word in modern use comes from the French tricotage. Even Arabic, in whose region the oldest pieces of knitted fabric have been found, has no true word for knitting. Hayak, Hayyak, is used, but it also means weaving and plaiting. Many Arabs prefer to use the French word. China, Japan, and Korea use words borrowed from weaving and netting. The contrast with words for weaving is striking. In most languages, there is a precise, ancient, and well-developed vocabulary for weaving. Weaving is older than history. The apparently simple process of knitting turns out to be much less ancient. Shakespeare. Nothing shows more clearly how wary the reader must be of the meaning of the word knit than study of the way Shakespeare used it between 1590 and 1610. The word occurs in his plays 38 times. In 18 places it means simply joined, and is used of broken bones, hands, hearts, souls, persons, and scattered ships after a naval battle. 4 times it refers to knitted brows. In Romeo and Juliet it means wedding, as it does once in A Midsummer's Night's Dream. In Timon of Athens, it means gathering corn into a sheaf. And in the workman's play of In the Dream, Thisbe speaks to the wall of its stones with lime and hair knit up. The same meaning is found in Othello. In 5 cases, knit means tie or knot, as when in King John, Hubert knits a handkerchief on Arthur's brow because Arthur has a headache. In Timon of Athens, a man making a noose is said to knit a cord to hang himself. In The Taming of the Shrew, the servants wear garters of an indifferent knit, which, although some scholars assume this means that the garters were knitted fabric, more likely means tied in simple, not ornamental knots. Macbeth speaks of sleep that knits up the ravelled sleeve of care, where knit clearly means repair, and would as easily refer to netting as to knitting. Then, in the 12th Night, Orsino speaks of the spinsters and the knitters in the sun, and the free maids that weave their thread with bones, which many commentators understand as a reference to lace-making, though it may refer to knitting. In only one place, where the word occurs twice, does Shakespeare unequivocally use knit to mean knitting as we now understand it. At the beginning of Two Gentlemen of Verona, the comic servants Launce and Speed have a punning conversation about the girl Launce loves, and he says that she can knit him a stock. That is a stocking. The knitting cup. Last paragraph. An inappropriate drawing in Mary Thomas's knitting book has led to a mistaken idea that there was a knitting cup at medieval marriage feasts. The phrase knitting cup is not medieval. It occurs in Ben Jonson's play The Magnetic Lady, which was written in 1632, the last but one of his plays during the reign of Charles I. A scholar and a lawyer are planning a wedding. The scholar says, "Mind the parson's pint to engage him in the business. A knitting cup there must be." The parson's pint and the knitting cup are the same thing. The lawyer means there must be drink for the wedding guests. There is no evidence of ceremoniousness such as attends the loving cup. Here, knitting simply means marriage and has no reference to hand knitting. So, all that, trying to find where knitting, talking about knitting in Europe mostly. So I'm going to read a little bit more from this book next time. I'll read through it and try to find something not quite so long, maybe. But I think it's fascinating to think that 400 years ago, even though people were knitting, it didn't have a name. Interesting. Well, thanks for sticking with me. I hope you enjoyed this and weren't too bothered by my mispronunciations of names. And have a nice week knitting. Stay cool, and I'll talk to you next week.